Hey guys, Eli here. I figured it was time to tackle another genre important to my formative years, power metal. Now, you might not agree with some of those bands playing power metal, and maybe you're right, maybe you aren't. I thought I'd start with the bands who got the ball rolling initially and that we wouldn't have the genre without. So, let's get started. So I didn't really put these in any specific order necessarily, but I mean, come on, where would power metal be without Judas Priest? If you were to interview every power metal band that there ever fucking was, I think every single one of them, if not 95, 99% or whatever, would say that. And to me, I mean, what's the most power metal sounding album other than Painkiller, of course? Now, I can't, of course, say Painkiller was directly responsible for all the power metal because it didn't come out until 1990. There was, by 1990 there was already power metal bands, but I think Judas Priest with Painkiller did influence a lot of power metal bands that came after 1990. So that said, I mean, of course, I could have picked one of the earlier Judas Priest albums. I could have picked, let's see, I could have picked Stained Class or something like that to be, more of a definitive influence on power metal. But Painkiller, though it didn't come until 1990, highly influential on the genre, I would say. And I could talk about this album all day. It's also my favorite Judas Priest album, so I guess I am a little bit biased towards it. But I mean, come on. And I guess I do have to kind of add that sure, this was influential on the future power metal to come, but it was also Judas Priest being influenced by uh, in my opinion, some of the 80s power metal bands that came before this album. I think they were also paying attention to thrash metal and stuff like that because not only did this album kind of push me in the direction of power metal, it also pushed me in the direction of thrash metal. So I actually included this album in my thrash video that I made a couple of years back. So I guess this is a double dipper, but this album to me is just so good. It's one of the all time great heavy metal albums, no matter what genre you want to try and put it in. It's just an all time classic. Nothing that's came after it has been better, in my opinion. All right. Metal Heart by Accept. This was their fifth album, I think, or was it album number six? Let's see. One, two, three, four, five. Album number six from 1985. This I was a little bit late to the Accept game. I will admit that. Well, why wouldn't I? God, yeah, I don't think I got into them until I was in my early 20s, maybe even mid 20s. I'd heard the name. Of course, I've heard Balls to the Wall. Of course, I heard Fast as a Shark. But I didn't really get into, buying their albums until, yeah, quite a bit after that. And Metal Heart was the first one I picked up. I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite to this day. It might be. It might be. It might be Metal Heart. It might be Restless and Wild. I'm not sure. But Metal Heart, of course, does have a special place in my heart. It's a killer album. I think it is. I don't know if I'd say it's underrated, but maybe just a little bit. It usually does get mentioned kind of after Restless and Wild and after Balls to the Wall, and maybe there's a reason for that. I don't know, but and again, just like all the bands on this list, you might go, hey, Accept aren't necessarily a power metal band. Uh, I would agree with that, but I think as far as influencing power metal, I mean, goddamn, Accept they might be number one. They might be the most influential band on the power metal genre. I mean, if we didn't have Accept, I mean, really, would we have ever had Blind Guardian or Halloween or any German power metal band for that matter? I think the Scorpions were pretty important as well. They're not going to be included on this list because I'm just not a huge Scorpions guy. But ask yourself that. Would there have been a German power metal band or a genre or whatever without Accept? I'm not sure that we would have had that. So Accept are, a massively important metal band, no matter how you want to look at it. And yeah, I love Metal Heart, and it left its it left a great impression on me. Even after all these years, I still think it's a classic. And again, like all these albums, it pushed me in the direction of power metal. Not knowing much about the lines that kind of divide subgenres and stuff. I want to hear more bands like this. What did I do? I went and found Blind Guardian and other bands. So yeah, except Metal Heart, it's an amazing classic, and to me, very, very, very influential on what would become power metal. All right, now, Fate's Warning, Awaken the Guardian, their third album from 1986. This was my entrance point to the band, if I remember correctly, and it has always, always, always remained a classic in my mind. It at this point, being a fan of this band for all these years, I don't know if I can still say it's my favorite Fates Warning album, but god damn do I love it. Just incredible. Uh, and a lot of people, a lot of kind of heavy metal experts, if you will call at least early Fates Warning. They will call it power metal. They'll call it U.S. power metal, which, if you're not super familiar, was a type of power metal that, well, obviously came from the U.S., but it had kind of a different sound. Like Fates Warning don't really sound too much like Halloween. There are some parallels. They are similar sounding, but Halloween is more fast-paced, double bass, keyboards, stuff like that. I guess it's a little faster. I guess a little more melodic, maybe a little more sing-songy, a little more catchy choruses and stuff like that. U.S. power metal is a little bit more stripped down, a little bit more blue collar, I guess you could say, a little less sophisticated, not quite as much on the neoclassical, guitar shredding and stuff like that. A little heavier, a little more crude, maybe some thrash influences, stuff like that. So that's kind of what U.S. power metal is in a nutshell. Fates Warning, though, they were always a band that was determined to not fit in a box because, through their career, they would constantly evolve. And, there's a couple of different eras, I guess you could say, of Fates Warning. But Awaken the Guardian, to me, is just a U.S. power metal classic. What is not to love about this album? There's nothing not to love about this album. You got John Arch, one of the best heavy metal vocalists of all time. He sounds a little bit like Bruce Dickinson at times, but completely original other than that. I think, maybe he took some influence from Bruce. I'm not sure. He has a style all his own. You can't really compare him to too many vocalists because he's so goddamn unique. The music here is challenging. You could call it. I think it is, even at this point, a little bit progressive. This is not your straight ahead heavy metal. This is just wild, complex stuff. To me, I think this is the best of the John Arch era. He was only on the first three albums, but goddamn, the other two are just as good. I could have used either of those two instead of Awaken the Guardian. But to me, this is the most kind of early power metal sounding, and to me, probably, in my opinion, the most influential on power metal that would come after 1986. Just imagine all the young power metal bands that heard this as it came out and were incredibly influenced by it. And why wouldn't you be? So yeah, that's going to be it for Awaken the Guardian by the mighty Fates Warning. So I think I forgot to mention, but I discovered most of these bands that we're talking about today in my early 20s, like probably 21 to 25. Some of them I was a little late to, some of them not so much. With the exception of Judas Priest, I got into them as a teenager. But even with Priest, I was a little bit late to the game. I don't think I really started listening to them until I was like 18. So between the ages of like 18 and 20, I discovered quite a lot of music, but between like 20 and let's say 26, that's when I discovered the most. Most of the bands that I love the most to this day are probably the ones that I discovered in that 6 year time period. So Savatage were one of them, and this was Hollow of the Mountain King was the first one I would hear, and of course, of course, it stuck with me all these years. Not only because I heard it back then, but also because it's incredible. This was their, let's see, fourth full-length album, came out in 1987. Savatage were just so goddamn unique. And another band, well, I don't need to keep saying it, but you might think to yourself, I just consider them a heavy metal band or something like that. Savatage were kind of one of those bands that, another band that really didn't, ever want to fit in a box because they were always doing different stuff. They would make super melodic metal, and usually when they went really melodic and really kind of light sounding, that's when I felt like it just wasn't working. But they liked to experiment. There's also a good amount of thrash in their sound, and there's a lot of early U.S. power metal, in my opinion. So Savatage were definitely, again, in my opinion, one of the most influential bands on all different types of power metal, whether it be U.S. power metal or European power metal. I think so many bands took influence from Savatage. And, like I said, this is their fourth album. This isn't super early on in their career. They have albums going back to 1983. So just imagine how influential these first four albums would be on pretty much all power metal bands that would come, after the early to mid 80s. But yeah, such a unique band in so many ways. John Oliva's vocals, nobody sounds like John Oliva. John Oliva sounds like nobody. Just like I was talking about John Arch of Fate's Warning. No, these guys aren't similar sounding, but they are both so unique and just have a style all their own. And of course, you've not just to mention John Oliva, you're going to have to mention his brother Chris Oliva, who was also a very influential and very original, unique sounding guitarist. He was just so skilled at such an early age, and sadly we lost him, many years back, and the world has never been the same. All right, Metal Church with their second album, The Dark, from 1986. Metal Church again were another band that yet you couldn't really put them in any one box. You could call them a traditional heavy metal band. You could call them a power metal band. And again, I would say early U.S. power metal band. A lot of people put them in the thrash box, called them a thrash band. Were they any one of those things? No, they were kind of all those things. But I put them in. If I'm choosing one of those categories, I'm putting them in U.S. power metal. They were early to the game. They formed in 1980. First album came out in '84. These guys were damn influential. But they've influenced, yeah, bands of all those genres I just named. But for me, power metal is kind of where it's at as far as the influence I've seen. I would say they've influenced power metal the most. This is probably my favorite album from them, but that's so hard to say. A lot of people go for the debut, the 1984 debut, and you're not wrong if that's the one that you choose. But man, I really like the 1989 Blessing in Disguise, with Mike Howe on vocals, R.I.P. Mike. But the first two, you had legendary David Wayne, who was also passed, R.I.P. David Wayne. Again, like all these bands had a very, very unique vocalist. I kind of prefer Mike Howe, but David Wayne is legendary in his own right. Just so many killer songs on this album. It's kind of start to back. It's a perfect album. Their songwriting, they were just on top of their game at this point. They were on top of their game. They were almost always on top of their game. Let's just say that about Metal Church. Kurt Vanderhoof is a great. Not only a great guitarist, but he's an incredible songwriter. He's an underrated songwriter. Some of these songs that he wrote on this album they're miles away in terms of quality, from what most bands were doing. He could write songs so well that I wouldn't call them progressive, but he could just write really intricate songs like a lot of people could not do. So influential to early U.S. power metal, well, later U.S. power metal, but European power metal, all different types of power metal. Yes, absolutely. Metal Church were completely influential, and if I'm going to categorize them again, that's I categorize them as early U.S. power metal. Don't know about you guys. What do you think? It seems like every metal church fan kind of puts them in a different box, and I don't think any of us are wrong. It's just interesting to see where people like to place them. And one of the greatest cult classic bands ever to come out of the U.S. from Los Angeles, California, we have Omen. I was a little late to the game with Omen. I don't think I really discovered them until my early 20s. God, yeah, I would say early 20s, maybe even mid 20s, or somewhere in between early and mid. But man, it's a bummer that I miss out on them for this long. But once I discovered them, I just fell in love with this band. You might think it's odd that I'm including a compilation, like a best of, but that was the CD that I found. That's where I discovered them. I didn't really know for the longest time exactly, although it does say on the inside, but I didn't really know which tracks came from which album, and for the longest time, I kind of preferred the tracks that would appear on their second album. Nowadays, I'm a little bit more partial to the first, but man, they're both just absolute classics. To me, they were kind of like the U.S.'s answer to Iron Maiden. They definitely, in my opinion, sound like Iron Maiden. They came a little later. Their debut album wouldn't come out until '84. They formed in '83, so Maiden, already had a couple of albums by then, and I think Omen were listening, but that's okay. That's okay. They put their own spin on it. They kind of went. They kind of. I mean, they had a little bit more of an American sound, that kind of U.S. epic. Early U.S. power metal. They kind of had that going on. They weren't super epic though. They weren't quite. They weren't quite Manilla Road, but kind of going in that direction. They had one of the best heavy metal singers of all time in oh god, J.D. Kimball, one of the best, and also one of the best guitarists and songwriters in Kenny Powell. Yeah, I love this band to this day. I cannot just put on one Omen song. I'm gonna need to listen to at least an album or two. So if you don't realize how influential Omen were on the power metal genre, give those first two albums a listen. They'll set you right. Absolutely, mandatory. Whether you're into traditional heavy metal, power metal, doesn't matter. You need those albums in your life. Queensryche was another band that I was a little bit late to, I'll admit. I had a friend in my early 20s who was obsessed with everything Queensryche. And I was into Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, and I was just kind of like, Queensryche, yeah, I've heard the name. I don't know if I recalled them from MTV or something like that. And I think I just wrote them off as something lesser. Um, but eventually, I would find the Queensryche EP on my own. I guess I would come to my senses. Later rather than sooner, but still probably in my mid 20s. And oh my God, they're one of my favorite bands now to this day, and basically from here out. Uh, so early Queensryche, this is 1983 EP, and the first album, maybe even the second album, is early U.S. power metal. Don't get me wrong. I will stand by it. I know a lot of people like to label them as progressive metal. They would become that later on. Uh, Even if you just want to draw the line on the EP, this is early U.S. power metal. Absolutely. I don't know how you couldn't see it. Some people I see will agree with me, and some maybe would disagree. But I think to disagree with that, I don't think you'd have a lot of ground to stand on. Um, I mean, all the hallmarks of great power metal you're going to find on this EP, all really even in just one song, Queen of the Reich, just by itself, and end of story. So, absolutely influential to power metal to this day. I think, the majority of power metal bands would cite Queensryche as a massive, massive influence. And, they influence me. I'm not a musician, but they're one of those bands that I go to when I need inspiration. I throw on Queensryche and just kind of all is okay with the world, at least while their music is playing. forming in 1980 and having a debut album out in 1982, I think it's more than fair to say that Manowar not only inspired the genre of power metal, but they also played power metal. Their early stuff is undeniably early U.S. power metal, but they would go along to make some kind of different music. I still like some of their mid to later stuff almost just as much. They would also kind of dabble in the more symphonic power metal genre, epic metal, epic power metal, all that stuff. Manowar were all that, but at their core, I think they were a U.S. power metal band, maybe a little more influential than most of the bands on this list, or most of these albums, I should say. But I went with 2002's Warriors of the World. It was my introduction to the band. Again, like a lot of bands, I'd kind of heard of in passing, or maybe I'd heard a song here or there, but this was, I'm pretty sure it was MTV, or it was one of those, or maybe it was one of those fly-by-night kind of music channels on TV that didn't last too long. But I remember seeing the video for Warriors of the World United, and I was already, I'd already been a metal fan for years by 2002, and I remember seeing that video, and I was just like, I was so sold. I was like, this is the most metal thing I've ever seen. Sign me up. I loved the album. I still like it, actually. Warriors of the World is probably their best album. Not up to that point, but this is probably the last really good album they did. Although, let me take a look at their discography. I do like some of their later stuff. Like, I'm a big fan of 2007's Gods of War. I think that's a fantastic album, but I think Warriors of the World is a little better. So it was a nice introduction. I would go back, of course, before I'd go forward. I'd work my way back, and I like some of those early albums a little bit more. But for being a 2002 album, and I kind of consider this is kind of a minor comeback, because there was a 6-year gap in between albums. Up to this point, that was the longest gap they'd ever had. So, a true comeback album, I think, is when a band calls it quits and then comes back, right? I don't think Manowar did that between 96 and 2002. So calling it a comeback album might be a little much, but I don't know. Call it what you will. It's a really cool album, especially with the long gap, and it being 2002. You got to also take that into consideration. True heavy metal in 2002 was not a cool, fashionable thing like it is now. You got to realize that, or maybe you remember, maybe you've forgotten about it, but it's a fact. Any band playing this type of true heavy metal in 2002 should be commended for it. And, I've been saying that for years, and I definitely stick to it. Manilla Road was another band that I was kind of late to the party with, but hey, you do what you can, right? I probably didn't discover Manilla Road until at least, God, it had to have been at least 2005, maybe even as late as 2008. So really not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. But again, you do what you can. 1983's Crystal Logic was their third album. That was the first album that I remember hearing from them. And I gotta say, I was blown away from the start. This Manilla Road are exactly the kind of metal that I love, and exactly the kind of metal that I really loved at the time, which, from the age of, like, let's just say 18 to 25 or so, I was all about just pure heavy metal. All I wanted to hear was Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, King Diamond, stuff like that. I just couldn't get enough of it, and I still can't get enough of it to this day. Those are still some of my favorite bands, and always will be. Manilla Road, though, I'd like to say we all know who they are, but God, I still every now and then will meet someone who's like, Manilla Road, who's that? How do you not know? I understand in the 80s and 90s, they kind of had to soldier on. They just never got a good record deal, and they're just the epitome of a cult classic band. But in my opinion, God, if they can't crack the top 10 of, best heavy metal bands of all time, who else? Who's going to beat them, They might not have been as early as some bands, but their first album was 1980, so they weren't that late. They were, God, they were, they formed in 77. They were right there with Iron Maiden, and not that long after Judas Priest, and, they just didn't get the exposure they needed and the exposure that they fucking deserved. And you know what? A couple of years back, leader Mark Shelton died. Yeah, in 2018's R.I.P. Mark. There will be no more Manilla Road, but the legacy that we have left behind is massive, and it will never die as long as far as I'm concerned.